And first up, we've got the frontiers and pushing the boundaries. We've got Tennison Leo talking about hypothesis hunting. So over to you, Tennison.
To kick it off, thanks everyone for joining the open house today. My name is Tennison, and today I'll be giving a talk titled Hypothesis Hunting with Evolving Networks of Autonomous Scientific Agents. And this work was done in collaboration with Silas and David Bentley and supervised by Mihala. To start off with a little bit of background, as many of you know, modern science has increasingly trended towards creating large-scale scientific measurements, and some of the well-known examples include biobanks, which include multiple different modalities of measurements with millions of patients, as well as cell atlases with different types of sequencing and Earth reanalysis type data sets. And these are large-scale recordings that contain many types of unknown mechanisms, associations, irregularities. And the goal of creating these data sets in the first place is to be able to do data-driven discovery on top of them. And while these data sets present a lot of opportunities for discovery, they also raise unique challenges, one of which is scale. With millions and sometimes billions of data points and thousands of variables, this creates a combinatorial explosion of possible findings and hypotheses that could be investigated. Another aspect of it relates to coordination, as many of these data sets require multidisciplinary knowledge, tools, and expertise. Coordinating research efforts and having this inherently human bottleneck can limit the ability to exhaustively explore and uncover the true potential underlying these data sets. And within all of that, there also exists an opportunity with autonomous AI agents. And the vision is that with these autonomous agents, they can autonomously explore the vast hypothesis spaces and iteratively refine candidate findings and to be able to, over time, accumulate and share knowledge. And how this all interacts with humans is that if we imagine these agentic systems running the analysis and periodically surfacing testable hypotheses that could be subsequently analyzed by human experts or validated experimentally. And many recent systems, most notably and well known, are the AI scientists and AI co-scientist papers have illuminated this exciting promise. And where they've demonstrated that LLM-based agents can propose hypotheses, design experiments, run analyses, and also interpret results. However, there are also some limitations to the current paradigm, which is that all of these systems are designed to answer a predefined question. And because of that, most of these systems operate within narrow and well-defined problem scopes, or at least human-specified problem scopes. And it remains an open question whether the system design as such can sufficiently cover and explore in an open-ended way on the type of large hypothesis spaces that we expect in these large-scale digital snapshots. And lastly, without a grounding question to assess the significance of a finding, it also raises an additional challenge. When the types of findings are very different in type, nature, and content, how do you know if something is scientifically significant, novel, or interesting? So that raises the question, what if we wanted to make discoveries directly from the data itself without a predefined question? And that is the problem that we're hoping to address in this work. And we call that problem hypothesis hunting, which is on the basis of these digital snapshots, can we do continuous and diverse exploration and surface promising findings? And illustration of this is shown in the figure here, where the system can take as input a multitude of different types of data sets, and the system will autonomously go off and over multiple iterations generate some findings, which can include candidate therapies or new mechanisms underlying some sort of biological system. And the ones that are considered very promising will then be passed along to the human experts who can validate it on the external data sets or generalization or perform targeted experiments to understand whether the findings are indeed significant. And I would say underpinning our work is is one singular insight, which is that scientific progress emerges not from individuals. And here, when we say individuals, we mean a singular agent or a team of agents working collaboratively towards a single goal. So this can also include multi-agent LLM systems with different types of specialized agents that are addressing a singular question. And the insight is that scientific progress actually emerges as a network effect and is not something that really necessarily is most present at the individual level. And indeed, this is how progress happens in human science, where breakthroughs can arise from many different researchers with very different perspectives and opinions working across different domains. And the cross-pollination and propagation of promising ideas and new methods, as well as critical debate and iterative refinement that helps ensure that the network evolves in a healthy way. And this leads to this cumulative, ongoing body of evidence over time. And it is exactly these social dynamics and these points I mentioned already, which include diverse exploration, critical critique, and knowledge exchange that are crucial to human scientific progress. And our work is motivated by this insight, and we try to replicate these dynamics in AI agentic systems. And the first step we took was to actually formalize scientific discovery or scientific progress as a continuous open-ended exploration, and specifically through the lens of the social dynamics. And exactly how that is done, we can model scientific progress, its interaction among four components. There is an epistemic landscape where each coordinate in this landscape is a possible scientific approach or a possible problem. And operating within this landscape are scientific agents that have very different types of behaviors, experiences, and research approaches. And these agents collaborate with each other through these endogenously evolving networks where you can think of edges between agents as either attending to some past work that another agent has produced or an active collaboration. And the network evolution as a whole is guided by a shared evaluation framework for what constitutes good science. And as a first implementation, we developed a method that we titled Agentic Science Collaboratory, or ASCollab. And this is an overview of the method. It is a little bit involved, but I'll be stepping it through iterative component by component. And the first element that I want to highlight is these existence of these agents that are distributed, but behaving in very diverse ways. And when we think about it, well, what diversity is really shaped by is through individual memory, experiences, and personas. And individual memory and experiences, simply put, is just a collection or storage of past research and artifacts, which can be accessed by the agent over time through retrieval augmented generation. In terms of personas, this is sort of like creating artificial personalities or roles for these agents that are defined by two axes. One of which is how they behave, and behavior can be thought of as, for example, whether they have tendencies to explore or exploit, and whether they tend to be solo or more collaborative. And the other axis is their expertise. For example, they might be experts in genomics or some survival analysis, and this creates this diversity in different focuses because of different behaviors and expertise. The second element I wish to highlight is how these agents actually collaborate over time. And as I mentioned before, collaboration can be loosely defined as whether when one agent pays attention to another agent's past work, or when they actively collaborate, forming multi-agent teams to produce findings together. And these collaborations are facilitated by two key social memory structures, one of which is an agent registry. So an agent registry is a periodically updated database of all the agents operating within the network, which includes their expertise and their past findings. The other memory structure is the internal archive, which is a database that stores all the findings produced by all the agents in all the iterations. And individual research agents, by querying the internal archive, can attend to other agents' work, or by creating the agent registry, can actively seek out and form collaborations in their research. And the last element is the quality control aspect. So quality control is a bit of a crude term, but essentially, it's about how do we ensure that the correct and meaningful findings are consolidated and spurious or dead ends in research are eliminated from the network. And in terms of how we achieve this, we sort of mirror the peer review process that human scientific research is based on. So this will be pretty familiar to most of the people attending today, but it's essentially it involves a two-stage evaluation procedure with a review and a meta-review stage. In the review stage, reviewer agents are matched to individual papers based on their own expertise. So experts with expertise in a particular area are assigned to assess each finding's soundness, novelty, and significance. And after which they produce a structured report. After this step, there's a meta-review stage, which is a comparative tournament. And this tournament is formed by topic clusters. So all the findings that concern a particular topic, for example, a particular pathway or particular type of genes, they will be grouped together and evaluated by a meta-reviewer agent. And the idea for forming these clusters is so that there is this stronger sort of relative signal or differential signal that can be used to decide on the quality of a finding. And the meta-reviewer plays that final role in determining which findings are important enough or significant enough to be entered into the shared archive. Colloquially, this is like a paper getting accepted into a conference. And these decisions are reflected in updates to the internal archive as well as the agent registry. And I'll briefly also overview some of the experiments that we did. And in our experiments, we mainly focus on the cancer genome atlas, and the goal is to discover novel, diverse, as well as meaningful hypotheses from these biomedical data sets. And TCGA is really a really good test bed for our experiments because understanding new mechanisms has real-world utility. And this, because of the large scale and richness of the data sets that are being recorded, it also presents a very vast hypothesis space that is interesting to explore. And lastly, because it's an open access resource, most of our findings can be reproduced easily. And specifically, we consider using bulk RNA protein arrays, survival outcomes, and integrated pathways data sets for 3 cancer conditions, including lung cancer, lymphoma, as well as pancreatic cancer. And here I've shown some of the representative discoveries that were made on these 3 cancer conditions. And to see more about the exact details of these findings and how they were achieved, please check out the paper in the appendix. But essentially, these include rediscoveries of established cancer drivers. And when we say rediscovery, we mean that the discovery was made that was later confirmed by a paper published after the underlying LLM's knowledge cutoff. And also extensions of known pathways with novel mechanistic insights, as well as a proposal of candidate therapeutic targets. And we also see some interesting emergent social dynamics in our network. And here in the top, we have visualized the trajectory of agent research over time. And we see that different agents exhibit different types of exploration styles in terms of how they conduct research. And in the middle here, we visualized how the collaboration network evolves over time, and we see some degree of self-organization where the size of the node and the width of the edges indicate how likely an agent is to collaborate and how strong the collaboration is between pairs of agents. And we see that the network is evolving and self-organizing over time. And lastly, when we analyzed the diversity and sustained novelty of a system over time, we find that using such a system leads to higher levels of explored, higher levels of explored hypotheses, which is visualized through this t-SNE plot here, as well as through the distribution of genes implicated in the findings that are produced. So in summary, the work that I've just presented is addressing the problem that we sort of termed hypothesis hunting, which is the scalable and collective scientific exploration on digital snapshots. And in terms of how we approached it, the key insight was that integrating social dynamics into an agentic system is beneficial for diverse and sustained exploration. On our experiments on the TCGA database, we found that these social dynamics and structures resulted in higher quality, more diverse discoveries and more scientifically meaningful findings. And in the future, what we hope to do is to extend this to different life science domains and improve the validation or essentially the peer review process, and as well as consider how humans can be integrated into these sort of discovery networks. If you're interested to find out more, please visit the URL shown here on the slide. And a big thanks to AstraZeneca and the Cambridge Center for AI Medicine, whose support made this work possible.
And next up, we have Skip the Equation by Krzysztof. So I'll hand it over to you now.
So yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Krzysztof, and today I'd like to present our recent ICML 2025 paper titled Skip the Equations, Learning Behavior of Personalized Dynamical Systems Directly from Data. And this work has been authored by me, Juliana, and Michaela. So the topic of today's presentation is really modeling dynamical systems, which are broadly any kind of systems that evolve over time. And there are a lot of examples of those systems, from weather modeling to climate models, ecological, biological systems, disease progression, and also pharmacological models, and even finance. And in particular, we're focused on modeling dynamical systems in high-stakes settings. So settings like healthcare or pharmacology, where very often we cannot just use black box models, but instead we need some kind of models where we understand what is really happening. And definitely the most common approach for modeling these kinds of dynamical systems are ordinary differential equations, or ODEs. So these are differential equations where we have the derivative with respect to time. And there's an area of machine learning called symbolic regression, whose goal is to actually automatically find those kinds of closed form mathematical equations directly from data. And our lab has done a lot of work in this area, so I'm just highlighting a few papers here for you to look at. But what we started wondering at some point is actually why we're interested in equations in the first place. So what is so special about a mathematical equation that is different from a black box model? And we came to a conclusion that one big differentiator is that actually you can take a mathematical equation and then analyze it to learn something about the system behavior. So this is something that you can do with a mathematical equation, but something that you usually cannot do with a black box model. But then we started wondering, we're paying a lot of attention to this like symbolic form of the equation, something that we call syntactic representation. But what we really care about is this description of system behavior that we call semantic representation. And that may mean something like the shape of a trajectory, or maybe the properties of the trajectory, like minima, maxima, maybe asymptotic behavior, and how all those different things change under different conditions. So then the dominant way of learning the behavior of a dynamical system is something that we call two-step modeling, where basically first we take a data and then we might use a symbolic regression algorithm to learn a differential equation. And then human has to come and manually analyze this equation to learn about its behavior. And there are some issues with that approach. One of them is that this analysis may be complex, so it may require a lot of expertise, it may be time consuming, and in certain cases, when the equation is very complicated, it might even be impossible. Another problem is that it's difficult to inject prior knowledge, because very often we might have some prior knowledge about the behavior of the system, but not necessarily about the actual equation that best describes it. And from similar reasons, it's also challenging to edit the equation. So if you see that the model does not behave in the way you want, it might be difficult to go back to the equation and change something about it. And finally, providing feedback to the optimization algorithm. So what we proposed in an iClear 2025 paper is something called direct semantic modeling. And in this framework, we have a model that directly fits the data set, and it's a form of semantic representation of a dynamical system. And only then the semantic representation determines the predictive model. And there are a lot of advantages of this way of modeling. One of them is that there is no human analysis involved. So the model is already in a way that describes the behavior of the system. We don't have to manually analyze it. Because of that, it's also much easier to inject prior knowledge because we're directly acting in the semantic space. It's much easier to edit the semantic representation and provide feedback to the optimization algorithm. And one big difference between those two frameworks is how the prediction is actually made. So in two-step modeling, what usually happens is that we can take the discovered ordinary differential equation, then we can take an initial condition and solve the initial value problem to get the trajectory. What happens in direct semantic modeling is that we might get an initial condition on maybe some other features, and then we use a special model called semantic predictor to predict the semantic representation of a trajectory. And only then we have another model called the trajectory predictor that takes the semantic representation and maps it to the trajectory. So now, before we move forward, we have to actually formalize what we mean by the semantic representation. And here we're going to use something that we've considered in an earlier iClear paper, where to describe a trajectory, we're going to divide it into these distinct segments that we called motifs. And each motif is going to describe whether this part of the trajectory is increasing or decreasing, and whether it is concave or convex. Then we can have sequence of those motifs that we call a composition. And this composition basically describes the overall shape of a trajectory. So it might first increase, then decrease, and so on. What we also get is a set of transition points between those motifs, and very conveniently, those transition points actually correspond to local minima, maxima, and inflection points. In this work, we have to extend the framework a little bit. So we'll now differentiate between motifs defined on a bounded time intervals and unbounded ones. And also we would differentiate between motifs that approach a horizontal asymptote or whether they just go to infinity. But now we can use this framework to define the semantic representation as basically the composition, so description of the shape. So for instance, that a trajectory might have a sigmoid shape. So it first increases and then increases, approaches a horizontal asymptote, and a set of properties. And the set of properties contains the transition points. So as I mentioned, those local minima, maxima, derivatives at the boundaries for slightly technical reasons, and also properties of the final motif. So it might be the value of the horizontal asymptote or how quickly the function approaches this asymptote. So then the actual problem we want to solve is called time series forecasting from static features. And the problem is as follows. So we have a static feature vector, and we want to map it to a possibly multidimensional trajectory. And this is a very common problem setting, and one setting when you might find it is actually in pharmacology. So when you have a pharmacokinetic model, you're often interested in modeling how patient covariates, things like age, weight, sex of the patient, and the dose of the drug impact a trajectory, in this case, the drug concentration curve over time. So now to solve this problem, we're going to use this direct semantic modeling. So to be more precise, in this case, we're going to have a model that takes the static features, and we call it a semantic predictor. It's going to contain two parts, a composition map that predicts the composition, so the shape of a trajectory, and property map that predicts all of those different properties. This will give us the semantic representation that we can later feed into the trajectory predictor. This part is not trained. This is a fixed model, which then maps this semantic representation to a trajectory. So now the really important design decision that you have to make is to how to choose and train the models for the composition map and for the property maps. And this is what we've done in the paper. So we propose this model called episode that works in 3 steps. So in step 1, we pass our features to the composition map, and we choose the composition map here to be a decision tree, because this is a very common and well understood interpretable classification model. And in this case, you can see how, depending on the static features, in this case, the dose of the drug, we get different curves for tumor growth model. So whether the tumor is going to be increasing or decreasing, or maybe first decreasing and then increasing. And then in step 2, we have to predict all those different properties. And here we're going to use a generalized additive model. So this is a special kind of model, which is a sum of univariate functions called shape functions, where each of them depends on different variable. So that makes it a very interpretable model, because then you can see how each feature individually contributes to the outcome. So we're training a different generalized additive model for each of those properties. So minima, maxima, inflection points, and so on. So now those models, so a composition map and a set of generalized additive models, gives us the semantic representation of the trajectory, the way I defined earlier. And finally, in the last step, we can take the semantic representation, put it into trajectory predictor to get our trajectory. So this is how the model works. Now I'm going to talk about a case study that we did in our paper, where based on a real data set, we wanted to discover a novel pharmacokinetic model. And for this case study, I'm going to talk about the advantages of our model compared to symbolic regression approaches. So one of them is incorporating prior knowledge, direct understanding of the behavior, but also verifying constraints, editing the model, and finally, how it is more flexible than some other approaches. So let's now first see how we can incorporate prior knowledge. So in a case on a pharmacokinetic model, one kind of prior knowledge you might want to incorporate is that whatever drug concentration curve you have, if you have no additional doses of the drug, you can assume that that drug concentration is going to decrease to zero. It's going to decay over time. And that means that there are certain compositions, so certain shapes of trajectories that just simply cannot happen. So we would like to exclude all the increasing trajectories and decreasing, increasing. All of those shapes should not appear in our model. And instead, we're going to restrict it to all the shapes where have the same kind of behavior at the end. So they all decay at the end. And by doing that, we can first ensure that our model actually has this behavior. So we don't have to worry whether it works in this way. It's going to be precisely specified by the model, but also we're going to reduce the search space. So we can hopefully fit a better model with fewer data points. Another thing we can do is we can directly understand the behavior. So after we train the composition map and the property map, we can then look at them. So in terms of the composition map, this is going to be a very simple decision tree. So the model actually found that all trajectories are going to have the same shape, where the trajectory first increases and then decreases and approaches a horizontal asymptote. But if you're interested in understanding how the maximum of a trajectory changes depending on the features, or how the time where the maximum is achieved changes, then also you can look at the underlying generalized additive models and see how each of the features contributes to the value of this function. Another thing you can do is to verify whether a model satisfies certain constraints. So you can imagine one constraint we would like to have for our model would be that the value of the horizontal asymptote the trajectory approaches should actually be zero. It shouldn't be a negative value, it shouldn't be a high positive value, ideally it should be zero. And when you look at our generalized additive model that predicts that property, you can see that it's actually very far from zero. So in this case, the model actually does not satisfy this criteria yet. But what's very nice about our model is that we can actually edit it now. So if we look at this generalized additive model, we can retrain the model and now put additional loss term that's going to encourage all of those shape functions to be closer to zero. So we can do that, and then we can see that actually we manage to have shape functions which are much, much smaller. So we're much closer to satisfying this condition, but we can go a step further and actually set all of those shape functions to zero. So now we have a model that exactly guarantees that this constraint is going to be satisfied for all possible data points that we're going to use it for. And finally, flexibility. So we are no longer restricted to just a very compact symbolic representation. So we're able to fit more flexible models. And we actually compared it both with symbolic regression approaches, but also with expertly designed population pharmacokinetic model. And we can see that we get significantly better performance. And in that case, we're actually also better than some black box approaches like neural ODEs or latent ODEs. Finally, we've also tested it on other synthetic and real data sets compared with other approaches, and we can see that in majority of cases, we get better performance than the symbolic regression approaches and quite comparable or sometimes even better performance than the black box models. So just to reiterate, in this paper, we use decision trees as composition maps to learn the shape of a trajectory, and we use generalized additive models to predict different properties of those trajectories. We had to design a novel training algorithm to actually fit this kind of model. Then we presented a case study of how we can use these kinds of models to train a new pharmacokinetic models. And finally, we demonstrated how flexible this approach can be in multiple experiments. So thank you very much for your attention. And I would like to thank very much our sponsors, Roche and AstraZeneca, that made this work possible. Thank you.
We have Nicolás talking about auto-formulation.
My name is Nicolás Astorga, and today I'm going to present Autoformulation, the first automatic way to model real-world problems. This is a new area, so there is a lot of work to be done. This is something that we started with Tennison and Michaela 1 year ago, but there are many more people involved now that we have developed more projects. So what is autoformulation? Autoformulation basically consists on taking a real-world problem, many times written in natural language, and basically formalize. But let's start with an example and with an optimization example. Let's say we are in a hospital and we need to optimize bed allocations. Let's say the hospital has certain amount of budget to spend on staff and a fixed amount of beds. The beds can be, for example, distributed into ICU beds or general type of bed, and each of them, moving them, costs different amount of money, but also they have a different ratio to save lives. So in the end, the hospital seeks to an allocation that maximize the expected life saved. So what does autoformulation? So autoformulation, what it does is basically translate this problem that is in a natural language, is in a very unstructured format, and make it formal. It formulate a very structured, in this case, mathematical optimization model that you can see here, which is still flexible because math allows you to connect a lot of dynamics through equations. But because it's a structure, we can use technology on top of this to find the best solution. In this case, we can write, for example, a Gurobi pipe program that basically will give us the policy or the optimal allocation for this problem. So what have we done so far in this area? So what I am going to present today is an ICML 2025 paper that is called Autoformulation of Mathematical Optimization Models using Large Language Models. But we have done a lot of work that is completed, but under current review process, which is basically how we can formulate Markov decision process in an interpretable way, or how we can go can we generalize a little bit what we are doing here, but to decide not only if we want to solve the problem with mathematical optimization models, but also with, for example, machine learning problems, or if we are formulated with Markov decision process, do we want to solve it with dynamic programming or with more sophisticated reinforcement learning techniques? So, okay, we are going to talk about optimization, and basically what autoformulation does is translate this problem description into a formal problem. And what is useful? It's because this process is there are solutions today for this problem, but this solution consists of hiring an expert of JP Morgan that is paid $500,000 a year, which are very expensive. And also, although they are very good, they are kind of a bit slow. So for example, if we want to do fast prototyping, we need an automatic way to iterate this modeling. And for example, allowing to fast respond of what if scenarios that we want to answer. But it's not only to help the big companies that can afford this expertise or to allow a faster iteration of this, but also it's about democratize this expertise to everyone. So for example, this autoformulation process can be very helpful for a person that is working in a cafe and needs to know which are the certain amount of material that need for a certain days. So this autoformulation allows a fast iteration over very unstructured problems and for optimization solutions in this work. So to cite Voigt and van der Berger, which are the two most prominent figures in modern optimization, what they say is basically, quoting them, is basically they say that the challenge and art in using optimization is recognizing and formulating the problem. And once this formulation is done, solving the problem is almost technology. So what they mean is, like, if we have a problem, we need to make many decisions how we are going to solve the problem. For example, let's say in the case of optimization is defining the decision variables, which are the constraints or the objectives, or if we have prediction or if we have uncertainty in our problem. Once we define this, we can have a policy, we can have the optimal policy thanks to the technology, thanks to solvers or solutions that we already constructed or are available. So as we mentioned, we are solving mathematical optimization model. Mathematical optimization model looks something like this. We want to minimize certain function or maximize depending the problem. And we are subjected a certain inequality constraints and equality constraints. The vast of the problem space is very vast. You can model things very differently. Like, so we need to use, and we want to use the large language model for this purpose, but there are certain challenges. In addition to this vast space, we need to navigate across uncertainty. For example, the problem description can be misunderspecified, could be ambiguous. So there are many things that we can do or assumptions that we can do that basically give us as an effect, it has that we can model the problem in very different ways. And even that, the large language model, we want to avoid redundancy because the large language model can give hypotheses, possible solutions, but we don't want, but many times these solutions are equivalent between each other. So we want to search this space in a very efficient way. And finally, it's also very difficult, like after we have this formal program, the solver can give us a solution. And of course, we want to optimize like the best possible policy and formulate the best possible, formulate in the best way, but to obtain the best possible policy or objective. But there is also an intrinsic problem that we also want to formulate the problem representing the optimization problem that was intended in the problem description. So these are the three challenges that we need to solve, and each aspect of the challenges parallels aspect of reasoning, exploration, and verification. Okay, so one can think that, oh, large language model can do this from scratch, and the answer is not really. In the moment that we were doing the paper, basically, if we try to prompt GPT-4, ChatGPT was not trained, and even current ChatGPT models, they are not trained to formulate a structured program. So what we observe is like we have a very complex problem. ChatGPT could give a solution with a good OVPy, for example, program, but the results that we run using this program basically are unfeasible, or it doesn't find a solution. And it's because it's not only that they are not trained on this, like they don't have this knowledge, it's also because they don't know how to use this optimization, mathematical optimization tools to improve their hypothesis. And finally, they don't systematically search the space. And many times, if you ask ChatGPT, they will give you a solution that is the same many times. And we don't want. We want to explore all the possible combination of way of modeling a problem. So based on these observations that we did before solving the problem, we came to this solution, which is basically we want to large language model generate this format program, but step by step. And also we want to use large language model for evaluation because again, we want the solution to be representing the intended optimization problem that was written in text. So to search the space, we are going to use a Monte Carlo trees for structure exploration, and we are going to use symbolic pruning techniques to remove redundant branches. This is possible thanks to the fact that we are formulating very formal programs. So we decompose the modeling into 4 components. So basically, Monte Carlo tree search is a tree search approach that we can basically define which step we want to solve at each layer of the tree. I'm going to show an example. So the first layer, we want to define decision variables, then objective function, equality constraint, and inequality constraint. So let's start with this example, like very simple example. So in this case, let's say a farmer has certain amount of land and has certain amount of budget to plant wheat and corn. So wheat yields certain amount of benefit at a certain cost, and corn yields certain amount of benefit at a certain cost. So the farmer seeks to maximize their returns. So the first stage is basically define the decision variables, and we can do it in two ways. Like, oh, we are trying to solve it, and we find that we can solve it in two ways. For example, in my case, if I try to solve this, I would have assumed that the land can split continuously. But when I see the solution in ChatGPT, it has also other type of solution, which is, oh, what happens if we cannot, for each acre of land, we cannot split it continuously because, for example, certain rules of land, or like, for the example, certain land has a certain type of soil which is not allowed to split the land continuously. So once we define when we expand the two children solution, we select one of them, basically an evaluation process that I'm going to explain in the next slide. But after, let's say the left one is more valuable, so we are going to explore this approach. And we are going to do the same for objectives, equality constraint, and inequality constraint until we have the complete mathematical solution. So we have basically a tree with many possible solutions, and we find at the end, this is a very formal program, basically a very formal mathematical program that we can write in GuroviPy deterministically and find a solution that will tell you like the best policy that we should follow. So we do two evaluation procedures here. Like every time we expand a children, what we do is basically we have our current parser solution, because again, we are defining things step by step. We prune equivalent candidates thanks to this technique, which are called MCT symbolic pruning techniques. This is possible, again, because this is a structured program. And then we use the LLM to rank solution itself. We tried other approaches that were state of the art at that point, and we found that ranking is a very consistent way of having how much valuable is a solution over the other. Also, we use, after we have all the program written, which is at the end of the tree, we run this GuroviPy solver, and they give us like if there is a solution available. Sometimes it says it's not possible because we miss some key constraint that is that make impossible to the solver find a solution. And we also run complete solution across different parts of the tree, and we backpropagate the reward of the tree. I cannot go more into details because of the time limitations, but if you have questions, I can respond that later. So how we measure accuracy? So this is a new area, and benchmarks are not really well defined. So an ideal metric will be compared like it will have a data set with a mathematical optimization model, but current benchmark first do not provide this real model. And if we have like a mathematical model associated to a problem description, we will need an expert manually check if our mathematical model is correct. We have some evaluation study in the paper if you want to look at them. But in practice, what we follow is basically a very simplistic and heuristically technique, which is basically we compare the objective that our model found with an objective that the benchmark gives. So the benchmark doesn't give the model, but gives like the value of that they found. So the results are this. I think one of the main things that I want you to show is that if you do a standard prompting, you don't get very good results. But if you do like our auto-formulation models, the results are much better. And also another thing that we need to highlight is that there are large language approaches that are trying to fine-tune models so they get more used to this optimization mathematical problem. But our approach, thanks to all the the technique that we use is also very competitive against this fine-tune technique. So our approach will be even better if you fine-tune it too. There are three main points that I want to show, like in the result. There are much more details in the paper, but if we spend more computation, we find more solution, and probably and also the solution that we are looking for. We also have reward models tests in the paper if you want to look them. Another thing that is very interesting is that our pruning and ranking allow efficient search. So to measure this, we basically can check how much redundant solution is found at each of the step. For example, if we are defining decision variables and we have 10 children, our method, and particularly MCT pruning, allows to have only keep 2 of them because only 2 of the solutions are truly unique. and the same for all the other steps, which accumulates over all the search of the tree, which is makes the search much more efficient. Another thing that is interesting, if the problem is harder, more solutions are found, which is reflected in the entropy. Harder problem has higher entropy, which means that for very easy problems, like our pruning techniques basically allow automatically to basically have a less dense tree because it's an easier problem. There are less ambiguity or less difficulty in solving the problem. So what have we found so far is that autoformulation has the potential to automate and enhance decision intelligence pipeline. Model verification remains a crucial limitation and bottleneck. We solve mainly using LLM as a judge, but there are many more things that can be tried. And also, all of these search technique can be enhanced through extensive tool use, using RAG, or putting the human in the loop interaction. For example, we have a paper accepted in iClear 2025 where we developed techniques that allows a very efficient human in the loop interaction. And this is necessary for autoformulation because we need sometimes, again, the problem is specified and we need to have an input of the expert or the problem that is the solution of a problem. And also, we still require large benchmark. Again, this is very new with diverse problem, complexity, and types. I want to thanks very much our sponsors, Microsoft, AstraZeneca, GSK, CCM, and Amstrad. Thank you very much.